Good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Austin with Mytech. Today we are going to start the February U, the Mytech U for February, which is 3 ways to prepare your business for the cloud. Today is a unique opportunity as I'd like to illustrate our partnership with IBM. IBM is not just a mere vendor to Mytech. They're a true partner. An example of that is what we're about to do on this webinar. We have an expert from IBM, Bob Mullen, and he is going to be leading the presentation, but it's going to be a dialogue, and we're going to use some case studies from IBM as well as some examples from Mytech's experience as far as how this technology actually relates to a small business and the things that you're probably already doing relative to cloud technology and the ways in which you can prepare your business to leverage these different cloud technologies and things you need to be aware of. So as we move along, please feel free to ask questions and we'll interject or answer them at the end. But I want to thank Bob today for participating in this webinar and collaborating with Mytech to be able to deliver some of this content to our customers and partners on the call, as well as who will be watching after the fact the recording on our website. So Bob, if you'd take it away and start your part of the presentation, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. And today what we're going to do is we're going to conduct a virtual whiteboard. I think we're using this method because it's going to allow for a better conversation between Nathan and I and a way of bringing up your questions. And plus it's a great way to give an overview on our subject today, which is cloud computing. So I'm going to start out with the definition of cloud computing. And basically the way I like to think of it is in the old model of IT, in the way we did business with our end users and such, the end users would be buying products that they would then go ahead and use. In the new model, the cloud computing model in this case, the users are no longer buying a product. Instead, they're buying a service. And they may be buying that service directly from IT if it's a private cloud, or they may be buying it from somebody like Salesforce.com if it's a public cloud environment. But in both those cases, a cloud computing infrastructure needs to have the following capabilities. The first thing they need is they have to be a resilient infrastructure in place. So you don't want to have any points of failure in this case. It's got to be something that's available 24/7 and also has to be well managed. Second thing, it needs to have network accessibility for everybody. So whether they're on an iPad or on their browser of any sort in this case, from that point they should have complete access to those applications. In addition to that, you need to be quick in the way that you can get to these users when they require more services. Being a cable company in this case doesn't cut it, so to speak. You can't tell them they'll be somewhere on Wednesday between 7 and 5 p.m. Instead, it has to be available to them on demand, so to speak, when they need that new provisioning taking place. In addition to that, it's got to be elastic, pliable in this case, because you don't know exactly where the market demands are going to strike from in that case. What you need to have is a system and a resource pool available, in this case, that can move quickly based on market demands to fill up that space necessary for them to take over. And of course, in our model here too, we need a way for the users to be able to go online themselves and request more of your service in that case. So it's got to be going in that, and hand in hand, finally, you need a way of measuring that service, of metering, if you will, so that you have a way of doing tracking what is being used in the service you're providing, and for the end users in that point to be charged and know that they're getting their money's worth as they're going through. Now, given those models, let's take a look at the different types of clouds available. First type, I think we might all be aware of in certain cases here, the public cloud. Salesforce.com is a great example of a public cloud application. A second type of application would be a private cloud. And in a private cloud, this is something that's taking place behind your firewall. And so it's going to be in a secure environment, and it might have to do with core applications that are unique and add specific value to the way your corporation or organization is being run.
If I may interject
And then
on that point,
along,
Bob,
oh, go ahead.
just to, I'm going to kind of jump in here and there just to point out and try and bring it to a level of understanding that you know, to relate it to some of the small business customers that I know that will be watching this or that are already on the call today, is that, you know, when you talk about private cloud, you know, a lot of people, you know, realize that it's essentially the traditional way of doing business with IT is essentially building your own cloud. You typically have servers that you've bought that might sit in your office, that are sitting in that back closet, that are running all of your applications. And in essence, that's a private cloud, right? So it's stuff that you're already doing today and the way you've been doing business for a while, but now it's understanding what are the things that you should do to prepare that private cloud, and Bob will get into this, but how we can prepare that private cloud if you are going to leverage something in the public cloud, or if you want to migrate something that you currently have in your infrastructure to a hosted environment. So one of the things I want to make sure to point out on this webinar today is how some of this technology you're already using. It's just a matter of how do you need to potentially change the way in which you're using it if it makes sense for your organization to leverage other technologies that Bob is alluding to here.
Right, and I think the other thing would be in case there. Great point, Nathan. I think where some people might be doing is they may want to extend that so they could provision items a little bit faster for the end users. And then second thing would be maybe introducing down the road, if it couldn't have to be right away, but down the road, if you decide to move it more to a service offering for your users, some form of chargeback and metering control there. So going into there, we looked at now what a hybrid is. And a hybrid cloud is really a case where you're taking a combination of an application running on the public cloud along with on your private cloud, and you're finding a way that you can share data between those two items. So an example we'll show a little bit later, Salesforce.com would keep tracking data on all the sales processes you're going through with your client, but you might also want to get information from your support infrastructure, which is running, or your ERP system, and they need to share the data between those in order for the sales reps and the support people to be able to support their customers as well as possible. Now, given those three types of clouds, there's also three types of offerings people typically have. And those are in the case of one being an infrastructure as a service. This would be a case where you could go online and be able to store things, for instance, online as backup and make it available for people. A second type would be platform as a service. And this would be the case where you would have things like a Windows environment ready-made for people so that you could then put your applications right on top of that after it's being brought in on demand. And the third one that most of us are familiar with is software as a service. Once again, that's an example such as Salesforce.com that does that. So now that we kind of see where a cloud looks like overall, let's take a look at some of the drivers that we have around cloud computing. And when we look at the reason why people are moving to cloud, one of the first things is that customer expectations for what you can do in an internet environment have changed dramatically in the last few years. If you think about things like Amazon.com, or an example of things that Apple that we can do with iPod Shuffle, things like that go in. People are now looking to be able to address things and have it readily available for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it should be as easy as just quickly logging in and having access to that information. A second thing that's changed is just the IT economics model. It used to be in this case that everything was purchased in this case, and you would have outlays to go ahead and make those purchases, and you would plan for the year ahead based on that. Now it's becoming more of a cost center, and you're trying to keep your cost under control in this case and looking for ways to operate in a more economic environment as you're going through. And then the first thing, the third item in that case, is the demands brought on us by the marketplace. And in this case, things have become more global in nature. Our competition isn't just in the next city over or in the United States, it's all across the world. So we need to be available to our customers on a 24-hour worldwide basis as we're going through there. We also need that ability that when marketing, sales, and other parts of the company come up with new alternatives and new ideas, that we can react very quickly in order to support their needs. So now that we know what's driving the cloud, let's take a look at some of the challenges that people face when they're implementing cloud computing. And it kind of comes up into place. These three items here will have things that dictate which way you want to go with your workloads. And the first one that really comes to mind is security. And in this case, we're looking at, it's going to, in many cases, dictate whether or not you want to implement something in a private environment or you want to go to a public environment. And when we talk about security, we're looking at a couple items. One is your end users that are using the applications. How are we going to authorize them in this case? Are we going to go against our own private directory, our Active Directory in this case, for them to authenticate? And secondly, in that case, is what authorization in terms of levels they will have to the application, how are we going to be able to manage that? Perhaps even a bigger area in some cases would be the data that is stored, making sure that it is stored in a secure environment. So in certain cases, people that run public applications, depending on what they're using it for, they have to go to great degrees to protect that data. And from your IT perspective, you have to do your due diligence to make sure that the data is always in a protected mode.
So Bob, let's take a moment, let's pause for a moment, and let's kind of tie all that together. You know, when you talk about different expectations, you know, one of the things that Apple has done brilliantly is that they have driven change inside of the corporate world by providing devices at a level, right? So you think about they've driven things like the iPhone, the iPad, and of course there's Droid devices as well. But Apple really started a revolution, and it was interesting the fact that they started it going to the end user. So where that demand has created starts with those customer expectations you're talking about. People want to be able to use these devices for business purposes, but the challenge all along has been, okay, is there a good business function for them? Can we get access to our applications? Is it secure? And now it's an interesting thing the business owners and IT people face is, okay, and we've experienced this with some of our customers where people have iPhones or smartphones that they connect to the corporate network, and then if they have to let them go, well, now what do you do with all the email data or the other documents that they might have on these personal devices, right? So it's not just about, one of the things you mentioned, which is getting people access to this information and making sure that that connection is secured, like if you're going to go to your online banking, right, making sure that you have a secure connection to access that information, but it's also how do you control the proliferation of personal devices being brought into this environment as well. And I know that faces, I went to a restaurant for breakfast this weekend, and they had an iPad that they were using to take to get the list of people that were waiting, the waiting list. So
exactly.
I mean, these applications are being used, and it presents these different challenges to business owners, making sure that that security is not just about, hey, my username and password. It's it's access to the data, as well as in the unfortunate event that you have to let a staff member go. How do you make sure that you can control those end devices, whether it be a laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone?
And I've seen it on a couple levels. One was a school district, speaking with the IT director there, and he basically told me that the board went out and purchased a bunch of iPads for a couple of the schools. This happened in North Dakota. And now they had to go back and build the back-end system to support all that.
Mm-hmm.
Second environment there was a case of a corporation. In that case, they said the executives bought iPads in this case, and now they're saying, how can we use this? So yeah. it hits home in that case. A smaller number on the second time, but obviously somebody that IT needs to be able to support. Good news is it's generating demand for their services. So the big thing is, how do we control that? Next level we're looking at is integration. You have applications that you've currently been running. Now you're going ahead and people are introducing new public cloud applications they're using, or even private cloud applications that you're able to reach out to new members. Maybe before you could only go to internal Salesforce. Now you can go to your business partners. With that, you need points of integration to be able to take what you have and complete the solution as you're going through. Another area, and we were just alluding to this, is the idea of control. One of the dangers you could run into in the cloud environment would be if everybody in different departments goes off and runs and buys different cloud solutions. How do you bring them all together instead of just becoming separate entities with no connectivity between them? So this is something that IT needs to be out in front and be the leader in how your company implements your cloud solutions as you're going through.
And Bob, let's pause there for a second too, and as well, and let's relate it to some real business cases with regard to cloud technologies. One of the key ways in which, if anybody that's listening that currently or that will be listening in the recorded form, I encourage you at this moment, think about the different applications you use, whatever that line of business application is, or your email that you use, how that integrates with your phone, if you have an accounting system that integrates. So you have these disparate systems, because I've yet to find an organization that has one application that does everything for them. And one of the ways in which an organization can realize efficiency is by taking these different applications that they use and integrating them together. So there's some point where you drive out the duplication of data entry, right? Instead of manually doing that and all the mistakes that might come along with that, you actually integrate it so that it's much more efficient, and you minimize the mistakes as well as the additional labor that you're paying for to do that duplication. The challenge that's oftentimes posed, and this isn't always the case, but this is definitely something to be aware of, again, as you're preparing your business to potentially leverage cloud technology, is that if you're using a hybrid model, as Bob illustrated in the whiteboard here, you have some application that exists in your local premise, and the servers are in that back closet, and then you start leveraging a hosted version of, say, something like Salesforce.com or a hosted accounting application. Now, there could be some potential breaks in that integration. You may have a lot more difficult time integrating something that exists on a third party's infrastructure and then as well as on your infrastructure. So in some essence, if you don't plan these kind of transitions correctly, again, just think about your applications that you use day to day, you can actually decrease your productivity and efficiency as opposed to improving it. So there's a lot of factors to be able to consider other than just whether you should move it to the cloud.
Perfect, and what a great lead-in as well, because the next thing we're looking at now is how do we develop a plan for cloud computing. So really when we're going to the cloud, we're really going to be taking three major steps. The first one is planning for what we're going to put on the cloud and where we're going to put it. Second one is going to be building that infrastructure that we need, and then finally deployment. So when we're looking at planning, the first thing we have to do is meet and take a look, and it's really going to be when we're trying to figure out where to deploy items, we're really going to look at a couple things that drive that. Number one is your current infrastructure and the capabilities that you possess to be able to pull this off. The second thing is going to be the business and market forces. And just like we were given the examples of Apple's changing the way people are doing business at that point and driving in, it could also be events in the world markets and such could also have an impact in the way things go, and new technologies being developed. So as we go through here, what we want to do is first take a look at our workloads, and we figure out that there's multiple paths that we can take to get to public clouds, to hybrid clouds, or private clouds in this case. So what we have to do is take a look at our workloads and ask the following questions of ourselves. Number one, what workloads are we working with in this case that are going to be good candidates for the cloud? Second thing we have to figure out is if they're a good candidate for the cloud, where are they going to be the best fit? Is it going to be a good public application? Is there going to be something in this case that for security purposes or the fact that it's so unique, it's going to fit better in a private environment? Or it's going to be somewhere in between where you find that 85% of what you need is available in a public cloud application, but that last 15% needs to be private, so hence it becomes a hybrid solution. In addition to that, you're going to figure out, how am I going to get there? So you're going to have to take an assessment of what you have infrastructure-wise how that application has been developed and is processed in place right now, and what it will take to move ahead. And as you get to that point, we look at the architecture and infrastructure that you have in place. So let's take a look at what it's going to take to build that cloud environment. And when we look at a cloud environment, the first thing we all look at is our current infrastructure that we have in place. These are the operating systems, the servers, the storage, the network that you have in place that people are accessing their applications with today. And one of the first things we need to do, if you look at that listing that we have in the upper right, we have to say, okay, how close are we to being able to offer all the things such as resource pooling, network access, and such as we go through. And what we have found in this case, in order to make items cloud ready, there are certain elements that need to take place. The first one of those is we need to have that resources, all the resources pulled together. And this isn't just, by the way, the servers in this case, which could be pulled together in a virtualized environment, but also in the case here, it could be your network involved and your storage capabilities. The ability to virtualize those helps you on a couple fronts. One, it becomes much easier to manage, but just as important here, your ability to react on a dime in order to be elastic in the environment increases dramatically in that case. Also in this case, a resiliency comes into play, because if you have a particular server go down, you can have a spare server or else be able to move your workloads over quickly through your virtualization tools. A second thing, now that we have a stable environment to work off, we want to make sure that how can we rapidly provision these items and be able to automate and deal with those in an automated fashion. So this is the thing, being able to offer a self-service environment, if you will, in that case. Also the ability to be able to catalog all your workload images that you have in place so that you could then be able to provision those as quickly as possible.
So Bob, let me interject
Sure.
real quick. I know you're throwing the next step on there, but trying to bring this to, we talk about the build and design and leveraging virtualization and pooling all your resources, just to bring it to, so people on the call now and as well as listening in the future, I mean, think about, whether it's if you have one physical server that sits in your back office or multiple physical servers, or if you are leveraging virtualization today, this is something that Mytech has been building into our design for several years. And part of the reason is leveraging virtualization oftentimes enables us to deliver a better disaster recovery solution. It allows us to deliver a better backup solution in disaster recovery, as well as potentially into the cloud. It allows us to migrate your infrastructure easier. And so a lot of the times the stuff is built into the design of the solutions that your current provider and or Mytech is delivering, which is preparing you so that if you ever needed to say something today, an application that you're using today, again, think about your line of business application, that critical resource that you use every day, that the majority of people in your organization use. If that exists on your server in your back closet today, if you built it in a virtual in a virtual environment, or had Mytech or an organization help you with that, you've already started taking steps so that if you wanted to move that to a private cloud in the future, there's or a hosted situation in the future, you can actually do that. So so when you talk about these applications and virtualization and consolidating, all these kind of theoretical IT vernacular, think about the real practical piece of this, and think about your environment. We're just talking about if you have a server in your back closet to a couple servers, or if your servers are already virtualized, if you have one of the few backup solution in place in the last few years that leverages virtualization from a disaster recovery perspective. These are all the same technologies that we're talking about that are already starting to prepare your organization for the flexibility to be able to leverage the cloud as it makes sense for your business.
Great. And in that vein, the other area, the last piece you need is a tool to be able to manage all this environment as you're going through. So this is the thing to be able to track, for instance, how much of your services are being used by the end users as they go through. It's also a way to be able to manage your servers and storage infrastructure along with your network infrastructure, so that you can provide that availability people need at a good cost-efficient method as you're going through. So once we have the build, the next level we go to is deployment. So now at this point you've identified whether it's going to be a public deployment, in this case a private deployment for each of the workloads, or a hybrid at that point. And so here's it takes where once you have that infrastructure in place, now you're turning the switch and you're providing that as a service for your users as you go through. Now just to give you a couple examples here, I'm going to take some real life examples of some IBM customers that we've worked with, and kind of as we went through this plan, build, and deploy model, just kind of give you an idea of where it comes into play. So one of the examples I'm going to give you is a company out of Phoenix that is involved in the management of waste at this point. In other words, garbage collection as we go through that. But in their case, they had their data center was suffering from what we would call server sprawl, so to speak. When they were looking at their resource pool and how well they could manage it, it was not very well managed at this point. And one of the big hits they were taking before was just the availability. They were not able to provide that 24/7 availability they wanted to. So in this case, what they did is they consolidated their servers into an IBM Blade server environment where you have the capabilities in one hand to be able to have very high availability per blade, but also to have an automatic failover capability. So if one of the blade servers were to go down, a spare blade would automatically come into play to handle that workload. Hence, the resiliency would be better at that point. And because the Blade Center was virtualized running VMware and another tool from IBM in this case, that failover takes place without any notice from the end users. So in other words, the VMware software automatically moved everything from the failing blade over to the new spare blade at that point automatically, including the network settings automatically. So it became seamless for the end users at that point. They did the same thing, virtualizing their storage area network so that it could provision more space as needed in a thin provisioning mode. So it paid as you needed more space, the space became available. The big result for this customer is that they were able to get a tremendous improvement in the availability to their end users as they were going through.
So
the second company.
So Bob, let me interject real quick because because you just gave an example of a company that is of the size that actually where a blade infrastructure made sense for them. But there are ways in which that same technology you mentioned also makes sense for smaller organizations that maybe they don't own their own infrastructure at a data center. Maybe they look to still have some of those features as far as where essentially zero downtime on their key application. And those are some of the same benefits that if you were just even to take one or two or three, if you had a single server with a single application on it, or your entire, if you only had a few servers in your environment, all the way up to having many servers in a Blade environment, if you were to lease or rent a server at a data center such as Rackspace or Atomico or XO or SunGuard, some of the data centers that exist out there, you can actually leverage that exact same technology that provides near zero downtime for an application, but you're just paying for the resources that you use. So even if you only have a single server out there, you could be paying for the exact amount of resources that you need and all of that back-end infrastructure managed entirely for you to get the benefit of having that reliability and that uptime that even large organizations might buy and own themselves in the data center. So all that technology still exists. And if you think about, that's one of the reasons why an organization that has, even if you're just choosing to take a single application that you use and move it to the data center, those are the reasons why apply to you as well.
Exactly. I think the key thing is you want to figure out how far back you need to recover from and how quickly you need to recover in those cases. And the technology is there where it can almost be instantaneous now. So given that, we're looking at the next company in this case. This was a software development firm, and they sold services to build software applications for various companies. And they had switched over to Salesforce as their means of customer relationship management tracking tool. But what they found is when they went from an internal system over to Salesforce, all of a sudden the data that they used to share between their support system and ERP system, which were both internal, and their CRM was no longer there. So what they were finding is that people had to pass this information in spreadsheets and other types of things and manually enter them in. And what they were running into big problems, of course, was number one, the time it took, number two, the delay of getting the information there, and number three, the accuracy of the information. So working with IBM and our business partner in this case, we built a data bridge for them to automatically transfer the data from the private cloud, in this case being the support and the ERP system, to Salesforce, and also be able to have Salesforce pass their information back as well. And what it meant is that the support people and the sales employees that interacted with the customers had up-to-the-minute data to back them up so they could service their customers better. The ROI on this was 1 month, to give you an idea of how much of a value that was to be able to have that data merged together. And then finally, we have a home healthcare company, and in this case, it was kind of neat. They had a client-server application, and what that was is a way of being able to track all the HIPAA requirements that took place for the healthcare industry. It's very regulated in that case, and so they had a certain application they built that was very good. It was a core competency for them. And when they were looking at ways of making it into a private cloud, what they realized at that point is by flipping a switch, so to speak, and be able to add in a few more capabilities such as measured service and additional resiliency to the system, they were able to turn it into a software as a service. And so what ended up happening in this case is that people that were normally their competitors, in this case, had become their customers. So they were able to sell that capability of being able to handle HIPAA practices, the paperwork, etc., in an online application available as a software for a service for their customers. What they found internally is by moving it from client-server to software as a service, they were able to reduce their cost of deploying new locations, new people and such in this by 16-fold. The other thing it helped them is it really uncovered a small and medium business market. There are a lot of small companies that are involved in home health care, and they weren't able to have tools like this before. Now that it became available as a software as a service, it's really opened up and changed the way they do business. Okay. And I think, Nathan, you mentioned there's a case that you guys are working with at Mytech as well in the area here. Could you give us a story?
Absolutely. I mean, so, you know, some of these stories, again, as I mentioned, you know, when Mytech has designed solutions, you know, it goes into some of the network resources. When you think about the network, it's the switches that you never see, it's the firewall that you really never interact with, and the servers on the back-end infrastructure and the technology that gets built into that. And one of our customers in particular that we're working with right now has a goal of trying to move as much as possible to a cloud environment in order to protect his business and his customers from the event of a disaster, something taking out his building. So we are preparing the infrastructure so that if there's a SaaS model that becomes available, or if there's a cost-effective way to move some of these services to the data center, we're actually building the infrastructure and laying the foundation so that over time we can actually migrate these services as it makes sense. You know, one of the things that, you know, using that as an example, our model here as far as the plan, build, deploy, if you look at the way Bob drew it out on the kind of the whiteboard on the session here, that time frame doesn't have to be all at the same time. You can choose, in the way that we've seen over time applications and people leveraging cloud services. I mean, think about, again, I want the people that are listening in, think about the different application or icons that they have on their desktop. You probably have an icon for Word or Excel or Outlook or your key line of business application. If you think about that, those are the different things, those are the different applications that piece by piece, the ability or the availability of those to move to a cloud can typically go on an application by application basis or on an icon by icon basis. So it may not be that you can take your entire infrastructure, everything that you know and do about your business today, and move it to a cloud environment, but it may be that you have to say, I'm going to take this one icon, it's my line of business application, and I'm going to move it to the cloud, but gosh, my accounting program has to stay locally, or my email has to stay locally because of the way it integrates with my accounting program or my line of business application. Or it could be that email is one of the easiest applications to be able to move to the cloud, and making sure that it integrates with the other tools that you may be using. So it's laying the foundation so that you have a plan in place so that any dollars you spend on your IT can be spent in alignment with those goals and objectives. The biggest challenge that you face in this world in IT is if you don't have that plan, chances are you're going to spend dollars not in alignment with it, and then you're going to waste those dollars. So that's one example of where, because we know that that's the vision of this customer, we're able to start laying that foundation so that as it makes sense for that respective customer's business, we can actually choose and take one icon at a time or one application at a time and move it to a hosted environment. So we're coming up to the end, and I wanted to provide a summary of everything that we've covered here today, and just kind of break it down. In the invitation that was sent out, and as we put the summary together for this, there's basically a few different models. There's the private cloud, public cloud. You can use hosted services such as SaaS or other hosted data center services, and then there's also the hybrid model. I guess I wanted to relate that a lot of Mytech's customers today, and probably people on the call, are already leveraging some of these. They probably already have a private cloud. They already have infrastructure that exists in their office that, as they make plans, can prepare that if it makes sense to move to the cloud. Then if you look at the public cloud, well, gosh, that's already, you could move some of your services to a data center if you want, or you're probably already leveraging some sort of offsite backup service that's going to exist in a public cloud, or you're already using or you're already moving your applications out there, such as hosted Exchange, or your spam filtering that can be hosted services. So all three of these technologies, you may already be using some of them, and that's exactly our point, is that most organizations, it makes sense to have some sort of hybrid because it has to have a business justification. So you're already leveraging your private cloud. What are the things that you need to do or you want to do to make it ready in case you want to move to hosted services? What are ways in which you're already leveraging the public cloud, and if there's ways that make sense that are cost effective for you and the way your business operates? And then with hosted services such as spam filtering or hosted email or hosted SharePoint, what are ways, or Salesforce.com for a CRM, what are the ways in which that might make sense for your business if you're, or expanding the way you use that if it makes sense for your business? So those are all the things that we want to just cover today and bring it to light that you may be already using these technologies and probably are. And what do you need to do today, and anytime you make investments in technology, to make sure that it's in alignment with whatever your goals and objectives are, and how that might apply to the cloud. So Bob, do you have any other final thoughts?
Yeah, just a quick 3 things that we can do to help out in this area. And so in that, in getting to your cloud, the first thing I want to touch on is functionalities that we have here. So one of the first things we can do is help you with your assessments of where you are today. So this would be the case of working with Mytech in this. We can do an assessment of your current workloads. And if you're saying, you know what, I'm not sure where they're at right now, I need to get my arms around it, we have a tool that can help you understand where your workloads are running and how much resources they're taking up on each of the systems to see how good it could be in order to do a consolidation and virtualization. The second area is around making you cloud ready, and we can build environments for you that either you have in-house that you run at that point, or we can help you plan for a hosted environment to run your private cloud and hybrid clouds as you go through. And as we mentioned before, there's also tools available from IBM and Mytech for public cloud type tools that you can use as well to round out your whole repertoire. So that's what I have there. And I guess I'm open for questions now.
All right. Well, actually, so some of the questions that we've gotten throughout the presentation I've kind of interjected through the commentary. So at the moment, I don't see any other outstanding questions. So With that, I want to thank everyone who has joined us today and who has listened at some point from the recorded version. And Mytech is available, as well as with our partnership with IBM, to assist with, again, as Bob mentioned, the assessment, planning, and helping make sure that you have the right plan that fits your business, and we can keep you moving in that direction. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and I'm going to stop the session as we speak. So have a good day.